Diplomat expulsions to a new head of the VA. There was plenty of action this week in Washington, and Occidental College professor Caroline Heldman joins us now to break it all down. Good morning.
Good morning, Amy.
So we've had Russians expelled from the U.S. folks expelled from Russia. I mean, this is a lot of turmoil. Has this happened in the past?
It has. During the Cold War, there was this standard pattern where the Kremlin would do something, then they would deny that they had done it, and the international community would respond, and then Russia would respond in kind. So we're actually seeing a return to a pretty traditional pattern. A lot of people are drawing parallels between what's happening now in the Cold War. We're certainly not there yet, mostly because even though Donald Trump has taken this action, he still has yet to condemn Putin for his meddling in the election. And in fact, even after this attack, the chemical attack that prompted this action, mostly organized by Theresa May, Trump still congratulated Putin on a victory for an election that was anything but free and fair. So even though we've expelled these diplomats as part of 150 diplomats who've been expelled, organized again by Theresa May, and 27 countries involved, our words do not match these actions yet. So we are definitely freezing with Russia, but we are not anywhere near a Cold War sort of freeze. Okay,
and President Trump, he's being advised that he doesn't need a chief of staff or a communications director. That hasn't happened in a long time.
It hasn't, not since 1979. We've had both of these positions in place for half a century, and there's a reason for that. One big reason for a comms director, a communications director, is that we're in a new media age, right? We have social media, we have 24/7 cable. So a president has to stay on top of his or her agenda, their framing, make sure that it is what they want out in the public. And I think that Donald Trump, we would save a lot of taxpayer dollars if he didn't have this position, because he's not listening to them anyway. He's going directly to the public with his Twitter account, by and large. But chief of staff is very different. This is the person who is your gatekeeper and makes sure that folks, who are getting in to see you are not going to waste your time, that it's the best match with your agenda. So I think he would be hard-pressed if he got rid of John Kelly. It's one thing to go around him, which he has been doing, and it's quite another to actually do John Kelly's job.
Wow, okay. Now, the president's personal doctor is his choice to lead the Department of Veteran Affairs, and a lot of folks are wondering if he's really qualified to hold a job like this. But do you think part of this is because the president's having a tough time getting qualified people in to do these jobs?
Well, yes, the president is again in a bit of a pickle where he should have plenty of loyal people who are also experienced to choose from, but he doesn't have that pool. So he is prioritizing loyalty over experience, and appointing his personal physician is yet another example of that. This is someone who does not have experience to lead this agency, right? And it's not a small agency. It's 377,000 employees. With that said, this doctor is someone who has bipartisan support. He was appointed by President Obama in 2006 to be the president's physician. He's served several tours in Iraq. This is a man who is well respected. The question is whether or not that will translate into the skills and experience that he needs to head up this major agency.
Yeah, and the Ninth Circuit Court Judge Stephen Reinhart died unexpectedly this week. Now, he was known as a liberal lion, and now President Trump will likely replace him with a conservative judge. How will that change the Ninth Circuit?
Well, Trump has an opportunity here to really reshape the court. There are 13 circuit courts. The Ninth Circuit Court is by far the most liberal and has been for a very long time. There are 29 members on the court and currently 6 positions open, which means that Donald Trump could really shift the tenor of the court. He could make it much more conservative. And in fact, he's bellyached quite a bit about the rulings coming out of the Ninth Circuit. With that said, there actually is a check on this. There's a process called the blue slip process. It's not a formal rule, it's an informal rule, but it means that senators from the state can actually essentially veto picks coming from the president as it works its way through the Senate. What this means is that Dianne Feinstein and Kamala Harris might be able to slow down some of the more conservative picks, but the question is whether or not congressional or senatorial Republicans are going to recognize the blue slip process. They certainly used it a lot to block a lot of President Obama's nominees, but there is some concern on the part of Democrats that they will simply override this process and appoint very conservative judges. And that is, of course, what Donald Trump wants to do. He wants to reshape this court.
All right. Occidental College professor Caroline Heldman, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We certainly appreciate your time.